In January of 1968, the North Vietnamese army launched a surprise attack against the Americans. This was the Tet Offensive. Tet is the celebration of the Lunar New Year, and there was a tradition in Vietnam that had gone on for decades that there was never any fighting on Tet. And yet in 1968, the North Vietnamese generals decided to break with tradition with the hope that they could surprise the Americans, overwhelm them with force, and bring a swift end to the Vietnam War. They attacked over 125 targets across the country with over 85,000 troops. Now here's the amazing thing. The United States actually repelled every single attack, every single one. And at the end of most of the major fighting, which was after about a week, the United States had lost fewer than 1,000 troops. The North Vietnamese lost 35,000 of the 85,000 troops. And if we look at the Vietnam War as a whole, we see that America lost 58,000 men, and North Vietnam lost over 3 million people. And a close examination also reveals that America actually won nearly every major battle it fought. So it raises a very interesting question. How do you win all the battles, decimate your enemy, and lose the war? It raises new questions about how we understand the concept of winning and losing. James Carse, a theologian from NYU, wrote a little book called Finite and Infinite Games, in which he talks about games and how we play them. Basically, if you have at least two competitors, you have a game. And there are two types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. Finite games are defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective, like football. We all agree what the rules are. We all agree whoever has more points at the end of the game is the winner. The game concludes and we all go home. Then you have an infinite game. An infinite game is defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is to perpetuate the game, to keep the game in play. When you put a finite player versus a finite player, the system is stable. Football is stable. When you put an infinite player versus an infinite player, the system is also stable. The Cold War was stable because we cannot have a winner or a loser, and so we both keep playing until one of the players runs out of the will or the resources to keep playing, and then they drop out of the game. Problems arise, however, when you pit a finite player versus an infinite player, because a finite player is playing to win, and an infinite player is playing to keep playing, and they make very different strategic choices. And invariably what happens is the finite player finds themselves in quagmire. They find themselves frustrated and running through the will and resources required for them to stay in the game. And this is what happened to America in Vietnam. America was fighting to win, and the North Vietnamese were fighting for their lives. A very different set of strategic choices were made. And it's not so much that America lost, it's that they ran out of the will or the resources to continue to stay in the game, and so they dropped out. So this gets me thinking. There's no such thing as winning global politics. There's no such thing as winning governance. And there's definitely no such thing as winning business. But when we listen to the language of too many leaders, they don't know the game we're in. They talk about being number one, or being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based on what metric? Based on what time frame? These are infinite games. And when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there's a few very predictable things that happen. Trust declines, cooperation declines, innovation declines, and eventually we run out of the will or the resources to play, and in business we call this bankruptcy or merger and acquisition.